scenic rivers issues. Ted, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Ted Kowalski, CWCB staff for the record. This item, the Wild and Scenic Rivers update, you're very familiar. We provide updates to the board periodically throughout the year about the different status of different alternatives to wild and scenic processes that we've got going through around the state. And today's no different in that we have a number of wild and scenic alternatives processes that are going on around the state, and we've provided updates in the written memo. In addition, annually, we are required to visit with the board about the status of the annual or of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Fund and whether it still has its purpose and whether we should continue to fund it at the current level. And we're going to revisit that issue at the very end of this presentation. First, we have Suzanne Sellers and Linda Bassi, who are both here to answer questions about any of the updates specifically. But Linda Bassi would like to introduce Roy Smith, who's also going to provide a little bit of an update that's occurring from the BLM, and then I'll get up at the end to just offer the staff recommendation related to the annual piece.
Great. Welcome back, Linda.
Good afternoon, Linda Bassi with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. I wanted to point out that, you know, every board meeting we update you on the efforts of the Lower Dolores Plan Working Group and how they've been working toward proposed legislation for a national conservation area. And I'm happy to actually have provided you with a draft discussion version of that proposed legislation that the group has, you know, spent hours and hours discussing and has put out to the public. And at this point in time, it's being reviewed pretty closely by a lot of interested stakeholders. There are varying degrees of like and dislike of it and a lot of questions. And so at some point, the group would like to come and talk to the board about this, but I think they would like to get further along in the discussions at a local level and have more agreement on it. In the memo, I reported that they are planning on retaining David Robbins to do answer some legal questions. David Robbins talked to this group, I think it was a couple of years ago, and actually suggested the idea of a national conservation area patterned on something that was done in the Rio Grande Basin, a little something. And so the group, you know, the group looks to him for some guidance, and they wanted an attorney from that wasn't local to come in and answer some questions. So that process is ongoing, but I just wanted to point out this is a big milestone that they have finally gotten this language out. And you know, if you have any comments on it that you'd like us to pass along to the group, please let me know. So with that, I would turn it over to Roy. He's going to give you an update on some processes that we've been discussing for the last few months. Thank you.
Would you join us, please, Roy?
Sure. For the record, Roy Smith from the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you for inviting me to give this update today. BLM doesn't manage very much land at all in Northeast Colorado, and so I always like the opportunity to drive out here and see what's going on, and I was really impressed by what's happening on the South Platte right now. So BLM's making a lot of decisions this calendar year on wild and scenic, and you may recall at the March board meeting in Broomfield, I gave an update on what had happened up to that point, and we've had some more decisions made in the last 2 months, and I wanted to give you an update on those decisions and preview for you what's going to be happening the rest of the year. So just a super brief overview. BLM goes through three of these four processes in our wild and scenic rivers analysis. Eligibility, as you may recall, is just the inventory phase. We identify streams that have what we call outstandingly remarkable values for further analysis. When we do that eligibility report, we give each stream segment a tentative classification, which means a level. We identify the current level of development along that stream. And what I'm going to mostly be talking about today is the suitability phase, where BLM considers 13 different factors in our manual in order to make a determination as to whether a stream segment would be a good addition, potentially good addition to the National Wild and Scenic River System. And then the 4-step designation can only occur through congressional action by passing a law that puts a stream into the National Wild and Scenic River System.
Roy, can I ask you a question there? If you could just go back to step 4. Are these areas managed as this Wild and Scenic Rivers designation before they're designated? Is the management
that's a great question. I get that all the time. So what happens is if BLM determines that a stream segment is suitable, we're required to manage it under what's called interim protective management. That management is not as restrictive or as protective as having it in the National Wild and Scenic River System. But that being said, it is still pretty protective. And what we're required to do is, under the authorities that are available to our agency, we're required to protect the outstandingly remarkable values that we identified. We're required to protect the water quality. We're required to maintain the same level of development along the portions of the stream corridor that BLM manages, and we're required to maintain the free-flowing condition. But
thank you.
Yeah, a lot of the other things that are in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that other federal agencies are required to do don't come into play. It's just on us.
Thank you.
I showed you this map in March, and I'll show you it again. So we do these analyses field office by field office, and the field office I'm going to be talking about today is our Grand Junction field office. We had a final plan and environmental impact statement come out on April 10th specifically, and that office covers portions of several major rivers. It covers parts of the Dolores River watershed, the Gunnison River watershed, and the lower Colorado River watershed. So, and we had a lot of really unique creeks that we looked at in this field office. This is one of them, East Creek near Whitewater. And in fact, this is a stream where the Water Conservation Board appropriated an in-stream flow water right last year based on a recommendation from the BLM. So we have that proposed plan and EIS on the streets. The protest due date to those decisions was May 12th. So I think probably about the next week or so, we will be getting a document from our Washington office that summarizes all the protests that we got. So I can't tell you yet whether any of our Wild and Scenic Rivers decisions were protested by any parties, but I should be able to do that in about a week. And then we expect to enter a final record of decision on this plan sometime in July or August of this year. And this is another creek in the Grand Junction field office where the CWCB has appropriated in-stream flow. This is Granite Creek flowing out of Colorado, and I'm standing right out on about the Utah border right here. Okay, so the big picture for this particular field office, we analyzed about 530 miles of perennial stream segments that flow across BLM lands. Out of those 530 miles, BLM determined that 234 of those were eligible. That means that they have one or more outstandingly remarkable values. That was done several years ago when we were at the start of the planning process. Now that we're at the end of the planning process, we've determined that a total of 10.4 miles of that 530 is suitable for Wild and Scenic River designation. So where we ended up after all this analysis is about 2% of the total stream miles that we studied are suitable. We determined that 223 miles are not suitable, and so those are released from any interim protection under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and they're just managed under our land use plan prescriptions that we have in the plan. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. The in-stream flow protection that's provided by CWCB on many of the streams in this field office was really instrumental in finding that many of these streams were not suitable for Wild and Scenic designation. So here's a list of the streams that BLM determined were not suitable. And I've broken them into watersheds here. Some of the biggies are, we had 27.8 miles along the Colorado River. A lot of that was in the last few miles of the of the river before it enters Utah in McInnes Canyon's National Conservation Area. We have a couple of creeks, Roan Creek and Carr Creek, that are home to sensitive trout species. In the Gunnison River watershed, we had 17.3 miles on the very lowest part of the river before it comes to the confluence with the Colorado. I already talked about East Creek, just southwest of Grand Junction. And then we had a lot of streams that we analyzed in the Dolores River watersheds. Many of them are small creeks tributary to the Dolores. And what I want you to pay particular attention to here is that a very large majority of these streams with the red check marks have in-stream flow water rights that were decreed by the Water Conservation Board. So that was, a lot of stream miles covered by previous, cooperative work that BLM and the CWCB have implemented. So I'd like to sort of just read to you an example statement from our final suitability report for one of the streams. And we have similar language on a lot of the other streams that have CWCB and stream flow water rights. The language might be a little bit different from stream to stream depending upon the situation and the values that we have on that stream. But we noted the CWCB holds an in-stream flow water right on this creek that is designed to provide flow rates to support the fish population. This water right is a viable alternative to the federal reserve water right that would come with a designation as a wild and scenic river. So we just wanted to say, hey, we think this is a good management tool for us to rely upon. And so similar statements like that in the write-ups for about 9 or 10 creeks. This is a map, and from where you're sitting, I don't know how well you can see it, but I just wanted to show you where these stream segments are. This is Grand Junction right here in the Grand Valley, this sort of long white shape right here. So Roan Creek and Carr Creek, pretty high elevation creeks with, native cutthroat trout populations in them. These are the Colorado River segments that we were talking about. This is the majority of the river miles. We had a few miles on the lower Gunnison River right here, had a small creek called Rough Canyon Creek that's tributary to the Gunnison. Here's East Creek where the board made the appropriation last year. City of Delta is down here. And then we go through Unaweep Canyon and we come across this fairly large collection of creeks that have really nice values, just they're largely undeveloped. Some of these are in BLM wilderness study areas, but we have North Fork West Creek, Ute Creek, Blue Creek, North Fork Mesa Creek, and then we have many miles along the Dolores River, the part of it that's within that field office. So I think of particular interest is the Dolores River determination. And as background for this, I want to refer to something that Director Hoppy asked me to think about a year ago, I believe it was. The board was poised to make a decision on the Dolores River in-stream flow appropriation to proceed with, making that initial appropriation. And I'm paraphrasing what you said, but it was something to the effect of, this is a really big step for the CWCB in, trying to have a cooperative relationship with the BLM. And we'd like you to take that into account as you make your wild and scenic river determinations on the Dolores River. So I had that conversation with our staff and management, and now I'll describe for you where we ended up. So one of the things that was identified to us in the governor's consistency review and by the CWCB staff is that we had a small piece of the Dolores River right at the Utah state line that was preliminarily suitable in our draft. And the governor's consistency review and the staff said the state has a great discomfort with that small piece at the state line, because if that ever became wild and scenic, we'd have a federal reserved water right at the state line on one of our major rivers. And so we think that that's sort of inconsistent with state plans and policies. So I discussed that with our staff and we said, yeah, we think there's great values there. But that is a big enough conflict and we want to have a cooperative working relationship with the state. We're willing to change our designation on that. So about 8 miles in the gateway area down to the state line, our final determination is not suitable. And that reach from gateway to the state line was actually hanging out in the eligible phase from a congressionally authorized study that was done way back in the 70s. That previous study didn't make a suitability determination because they said, well, we need to talk to the state of Utah about this. So they just left it as eligible. And we thought, it's not good to leave something in sort of in that hanging state. So this not suitable determination just formally takes that segment off the table. The upper part of this reach, before it gets to Gateway, we have 10.4 miles, and we said that is suitable. That is almost all BLM land, pretty much all in natural condition. We have a whole pile of outstandingly remarkable values that include recreation, scenic fish, geology, and paleontology. The classification or the level of development there is recreational, which is the most permissive classification. It means, there's state highways, there's structures in this corridor. And in terms of land use, we saw very little conflict with private lands, and we saw the land use protections that come with a suitability determination as being highly desirable for this particular set of stream miles. But we knew that doing that there would still be some concern from state government on, if this were ever designated, what would happen in the water rights arena. So we thought about that a little bit more. And this is a lot of text for a slide, but I'd like to read it to you because I think where we ended up is important. It says the BLM believes that the strict land management standards associated with the suitability determination combined with a state-based in-stream flow water right to support flow-dependent values will assure long-term maintenance of the ORVs, which are the outstandingly remarkable values. To support this long-term partnership approach, BLM's suitable determination includes the following finding. If the Colorado Water Court System decrees an in-stream flow water right for the Lower Dolores River in the locations, flow rates, and timing appropriated by the CWCB at its March 2014 board meeting, and if the in-stream flow water right is vigorously enforced by the CWCB, the BLM does not believe it would be necessary to quantify, assert, or adjudicate a federal reserved water right if this segment is ultimately designated into the National Wild and Scenic River System. So we're sort of putting ourselves on paper in an official decision document saying, in terms of water protection, we're good, regardless of what Congress may decide to do with this river segment. And I haven't heard of any, interest groups or other parties strongly advocating for this segment to be immediately moved into the national system. So I don't know if that will ever occur. But the BLM perspective is, even if it stays just like it would be if we enter this decision, state-based in-stream flow right, BLM-based land use protections, we feel like we have kind of the optimal management approach to keep this river segment in good shape. Another piece of the decision that I thought it was important to read, we said that the BLM has determined that the appropriated flow rates are sufficient to continue to support the recreational ORV, even though the appropriated flow rates were based upon flow needs for fish populations. Finally, the 2015 priority date associated with the CWCB appropriation is likely to be more senior than a federal reserved water right associated with a designated segment. And the purpose of that language is just to put to rest any future concerns about, what water right will work best. We're saying, hey, the 2015 priority is going to be the best priority. And we don't want people to say in the future, well, what about the recreation ORV? Does the CWCB water right cover that piece of this river? And we looked at the recreational uses versus what was appropriated, and we think we're fine with the amounts that are appropriated. So we wanted to put those issues to rest as well. So with that, that's sort of a summary of the decisions that were made in the Grand Junction Field Office. Again, I don't know if any of those are going to be protested, but we should know by June or July where we're at, and I can give you a quick update at a future board meeting. We have some other upcoming decisions that I want you to be aware of and give you some general thoughts on timing of those. At the last meeting, I talked about this. I was hoping that this record of decision would be entered by the time I talked to you today, but as you may have observed, sage grouse issues are completely occupying everything at Department of Interior and BLM right now. And so priorities have been reshuffled, and we're getting close scrutiny to make sure that every land use plan that we are about to enter will be consistent with sage grouse conservation measures. So the delay in this plan for our Colorado River Valley Field Office, Kremling Field Office have nothing to do with water issues. It's making sure that we're set up where we need to be on sage grouse. So sometime this summer, we're still expecting this record of decision, and that record of decision is expected to adopt the Upper Colorado Wild and Scenic Stakeholder Alternative. As I mentioned earlier, we haven't had any protest to making that decision, and we also made a decision that Deep Creek near Dot Cerro, right before the Colorado River goes into Glenwood Canyon, is suitable. And again, we didn't receive any protests on that decision either. So I will let you know when that record of decision gets entered. And then other things that are going to be happening, I think the biggest thing on the horizon is our Royal Gorge Field Office, which covers all of eastern Colorado, everything on this side of the Continental Divide. Is starting their new land use plan revision. And what happens when we start a land use plan revision is that the eligibility report, a draft eligibility report, comes out first. And so we are planning on having that emerge in June of 2015. And so what that will be is just our inventory of which streams in that planning area have one or more of these outstandingly remarkable values. So won't be making any decisions about how those streams should be managed. It's just identifying what streams are going to be the universe for discussion. And our intention is to have a meeting with water users once that comes out to explain what's in that report and get ideas on how they would like to proceed. When I was talking at lunch today with some of the staff members, they mentioned that the June or July roundtable meeting for the Arkansas Basin might be a really good place to have that discussion, and I concur with that. And then some other ones that will be coming out, our Dominguez Escalante National Conservation Area. That's our national conservation area that's straight south of Grand Junction and northwest of Delta. That draft plan, so first cut at the plan, will be coming out this summer. And then Uncompahgre Field Office, which is out of Montrose, which covers a lot of the Uncompahgre River Basin and quite a bit of the San Miguel and the Dolores River Basin. That will be coming out this fall. And so that'll be a first cut on suitability determinations for that part of our planning world. So that's it for my summary. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Roy. Any questions for Roy? No. Director Montgomery.
Yeah, you just
No, you got demoted.
I got demoted. No, I just wanted to say that I think that your proposal and what you've done with this idea of the working with the state and the partnership on the Dolores is really commendable. And thank you for doing that. I think it would be a great precedent in the state of ways we can work forward on that, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, when I brought this up with our management, it was really fortunate because I was dealing with a lot of the same people who worked on the Dominguez Canyon Wilderness and the whole in-stream flow appropriation that the CWCB made there. And they said, well, that partnership approach worked in the Dominguez Canyon Wilderness. We don't see why it can't work on the Dolores River. So some of those earlier successes, I think, are breeding subsequent success. Yeah.
Director George?
Roy, I want to second what April has said. I appreciate that language. I appreciate the change that represents in BLM, and it's going the right direction, and it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Director Eklund?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Roy. I'm going to third the statements that have been made here, and just let you know that when we talk about our in-stream flow program, we value it very highly, and it's an assumption that sometimes we make that the federal government values it as highly as we do. But sometimes that's just an assumption. So to have it validated and verified here with you makes a big impression, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
And thanks again
Any other
for
questions?
having me give an update.
Thank you for being here, Roy.
Thanks.
Ted?
Thanks. Yeah, that was very helpful. And especially I, want to point out a couple of just finer points that Roy spoke about with regard to the Royal Gorge plan. And then also we're aware of some activities that are sort of rumbling up in the Rio Grande Basin as well. And so we've been talking to the directors from those basins about how staff can serve as resources and how we have this fund that's available. And with the draft eligibility report coming out in the Royal Gorge and the planning process starting in some other basins, we're at a place where I think we're really lucky and fortunate to have this fund available and the resources from the staff to help stakeholders explore alternatives to protect the resources that BLM and in other cases the Forest Service and other federal agencies are seeking to protect under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, but they can potentially do it in other ways like the in-stream flow program or some of these alternative management plans that we've developed. So with that, we are required annually to come back to the board for a review of that Wild and Scenic Fund and the process. And we think it's apparent that there continues to be a need for this, and that's reflected in the staff recommendation, which I'll just read to you. Regarding the Wild and Scenic Alternatives Fund, the staff recommends that the board, 1, acknowledge that the need and purpose of the Wild and Scenic Alternatives Fund, I'm competing with the lawnmower, Alternatives Fund still exists and is expected to continue into the future, and 2, make no revisions to the existing terms and conditions which are attached. And it's written in the document if you couldn't hear me over the yard work. So that's the staff recommendation for your consideration.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ted. Yeah. Linda, would you ring the bell on the blower out there? Ted, thank you. Thank you for the report. And yes, the action we need to take is motion to adopt the recommendation. Director Montgomery.
I would move staff recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Director George. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to adopt the staff recommendation for item 21. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that motion is passed.
Thank you very much.
All right, next, we're going to item 23.
And Andy Moore is going to take that item up.
Great. Welcome, Andy.
Good afternoon. I have some maps to hand. Andy Moore, CWCB staff, with agenda item 23, an update on the South Platte high groundwater issues. The maps that are being passed around are one of each of the study areas for the Gilchrist LaSalle area and the Sterling area for the pilot projects that the Division of Water Resources has been doing over the last few years with Project Bills funds. First, I'll give a little overview. Oh, got that up. As the memo says, we've spent $2.4 million towards high groundwater issues so far through Project Spill, through severance tax. And that does not include the $125,000 that just went into the last Project Spill, the request from Senator Sonnenberg to move it from weather mod to high groundwater issues. So now that number is a little higher. The main thing I'm going to give an update here on are the DWR pilot projects that we've been coordinating with them, and they've been doing these over the last few years in both areas. The first area I'll go over is the Gilchrist LaSalle area. That's that lighter colored map. And Ralph Topper and other DWR staff in the hydrogeological group have been doing these. They've done a great job. They put in monitoring wells in the Sterling area. In the Gilchrist LaSalle area, there turned out to be numerous monitoring wells available, some with a long record, so they made use of those. They hired the Colorado Geological Survey to do a hydrogeologic characterization of the Gilchrist LaSalle area. We're also currently, Brown and Caldwell is doing a high groundwater analysis for both pilot project areas that'll be complete at the end of June. Again, all this is funded from the project spills from those spills. There's been high groundwater levels in a lot of these areas historically. There's been reports going back to the early 1900s as irrigation had been underway for several decades. The groundwater table came up, started to create more consistent flow to the South Platte. As you may know, earlier, 150 years ago, the South Platte didn't flow year round. Late summer, it would often be hardly any flow at all. So the groundwater return flows in the alluvial aquifer system from irrigation created a perennially flowing stream from the gains. And so in the early 1900s, a lot of drainage ditches were dug to drain agricultural lands that had been seeped out and so on. So there have historically been high groundwater levels in certain areas. However, in the last 10 years, probably about since 2008 or so, we started getting an increase in reports of high groundwater, particularly in these two areas. Included basements with water in them, some fields that were seeped out, and also in septic systems, and in particular the wastewater treatment plant at the town of Gilchrist. If you drove on 85 to get here, you drive right by where their liners have been pushed up by the groundwater pressure and have big bubbles in them. So there's been issues that have seemed to have increased, and of course there's been changes in water rights administration in that time. There's been wells curtailed. After the 2002 drought and the Empire Lodge case, it led to much more strict administration augmentation plans and replacement of depletions. And there's also was a particularly wet period in like 09, 10, and 11 that certainly has complicated things as far as determining what the causal factors are. And there's also been an increase of recharge for well augmentation. Some of you have probably seen the graphs of the increase in recharge for augmentation in the last several years. It's several 100,000 acre feet a year in some cases in the South Platte. So that's what that high groundwater analysis I referred to. It's going to be an independent look at this to try and come up with some next steps and recommendations and what might be the drivers behind this. So in the Gilchrist area, they picked a large area that actually includes going from the South Platte on the upper left all the way down to the right to the east to BB Draw. This next slide shows the saturated thickness of the aquifer, and you can see better here the extent of the alluvial aquifer in the colors. The lighter colors, the yellows, are deeper saturated alluvium, and you can see that Gilchrist is at, where's the highlighter here? Gilchrist is right in the middle of one of the deeper parts of the alluvial aquifer. And in fact, in this next, and this is BB Draw here, right here, that goes, Milton Reservoir is here, Lower Latham Reservoir is up in here. Here's LaSalle and the river. You can see most of the alluvium, interestingly, the South Platte is on the upper edge of it. And in fact, as this next slide shows, this slide, this is work done by the Colorado Geological Survey to show where the shallower groundwater is. It turns out, so here's the South Platte again. Gilchrist is right in here. This is a paleo channel of the South Platte River that happens to go through the Gilchrist area, and this is BB Draw again. So there were, and these are where the shallow groundwaters are observed. Sorry. The darker colors are shallower. This is right around Lower Latham Reservoir, and it's down less than a foot to water in places. The red is less than 5 feet to depth to water. The orange is 5 to 10 feet, and the yellow is 10 to 15 feet. We consider really the 10 to 15 feet isn't, I mean, obviously that's not as much of a concern. It's when it's less than 10 feet or less than 5 feet, you're starting to affect basements and other things. Back to this slide, this shows the groundwater table gradient. And the groundwater is flowing, it's not flowing directly to the river, it's flowing more at an angle to the river in most cases. And again, Gilcrest is right here. So all on the map that I passed out, this shows all the monitoring wells that are being used in this area. They include wells that were already in DWR's monitoring network, that include some CSU wells put in years ago, that are now, these are all being monitored regularly now though, multiple times a year. There's also some central wells that are monitored, some USGS, the CDAs, the Colorado Department of Ag has some wells that actually have data loggers in them. And many of the DWR wells have data loggers in them. And in fact, several of them were installed as part of SPDSS. In this map, there's a light blue outline right here. And that shows within this region where there's been noticed a trend, upward trend water levels. And the point being is that in DB Jaw in particular and some of the other spots, there really doesn't seem to be a change in water levels over the last 10 years. It's mainly in this area and a lot of this paleo channel that goes right through Gilcrest. And in fact, even in that area, you sometimes can see one well with a shallow groundwater issue in one area near Gilcrest, and then a couple of miles northeast, there's not a problem. It's 20 feet down. And of course, a lot of that is because of the surface topography along with the bedrock topography and how it's affecting and where the groundwater table is in relation to those. So it's unfortunately, it's not black and white. It's not a clear-cut issue. So what I'm going to do is just quickly show many of these slides are either from the Colorado Geological Survey report that they did for us on this, and a lot of the other slides were prepared by the hydrogeological group within DWR on updates they put on their website very frequently. Every few months, they put together an update of the water levels and how they've changed. So we have an update, for example, if you go on the DWR site now, I think the last one, there's an update through February for the Sterling area up there, and there's an update through March on the LaSalle Gilcrest. And then another month or two, each one will be updated. But right now they have to go out and manually download the data loggers and compile the data and put it out. And we're trying to do that as fast turnaround as we can. So I'm going to go over some of the water level, the hydrographs from wells in this area, and the way that they're organized are by townships. First, I'm going to show this township up here, which in the LaSalle Lower Latham Reservoir in north, there's only a few wells in there that we're monitoring, and they don't show too much effect. Then this township, which mainly includes BB Draw, and then this one, including Gilcrest, which is where most of the impacts have been seen. When you look at these graphs, this is the ground surface, and so depth to water, so any curves that are higher up are going to be closer to the ground. In this case, it's about 8 to 10 feet, about 20 feet, 20 feet, and this one's very shallow, 2 to 6 feet. But of course, there's seasonal fluctuations as you would expect to most of these wells, primarily driven by irrigation. One thing I didn't say, but if you look at, and we'll see this in the Sterling area as well, but these are agricultural areas predominantly. And so if you look at the map of the Gilcrest area, you've got quite a few diversion canals going through the area. At the upper end or the southern end of the Gilcrest LaSalle area is the Evans No. 2 and Platte Valley Canal. And then there's the Western Mutual, Farmers Independent, and Union Ditch, among others that are in the same area. There's quite a few recharge structures, which are shown on that map that I passed out. And there's new ones going in almost every year, recharge structures. So it's something that we'll come back to later on. One of the bills that was recently passed had a section in that to deal with new recharge structures and how they might be affecting the groundwater. Okay, so water levels. So in some of these are in that northeastern township, and you can see that the water levels, there's a little bit of a rise in that one in the upper right here. When you see a long straight line, by the way, that means it was a long time between measurements. It doesn't mean there was a straight line there. So you'll see that in a few other slides. But these other ones that show a more consistent curve are ones that are being measured very regularly or may even have data loggers in them for continuous measurement. Here you can see too, though, that in that area that don't show much change at all. And by the way, these are going back generally to the mid-2000, 05, 06, 7 area in most of these. I'll try to note when there's some that go back earlier. Okay, next go to the BB Draw area in that township. And again, BB Draw has historically had high groundwater, and it's dominated with these reservoir systems and with Milton on the upstream end of the study area, and then Lower Latham at the bottom. And you can see you might be able to see a slight upward trend in some of these, but also they're fairly level. And again, we're looking at, in these cases, 10 to 12 feet down. This one's a little shallower. You can see it one point in recent time. Here's another in the same township. This one right here is an SPDSS well put in BB Draw about 2004, and that has a continuous data logger, and you can see it's been consistent during that whole period. So there has not been a change in a trend in that area for the most part. But now we'll move to the Gilcrest area, that township where there definitely is a little bit more of an upward trend in most wells. These ones don't show quite as pronounced, but give you an idea of the trend. And again, slight upward trend in these. Some very similar patterns in a lot of Yes?
Andy, just a moment. Director Gallagher.
Andy, it's a little hard to read your horizontal axis there from here.
Yep.
If you could explain what your axes are there,
Sure.
it'd be helpful for us to understand what you're saying here.
Again, this is the depth of water.
And those feet?
Yes.
Okay, tens of feet or?
In this case, it's a 2-foot increment each one, and so this is about 20 feet right here.
Okay, what are your horizontal?
This is the time axis. I can't even read it right there. Sorry. It goes back, most of them, to like 2005 or 6 or 7.
What are the peaks? Are the peaks look evenly spaced?
So it's a seasonal, it's mostly irrigation season. So we're seeing the higher groundwater levels in most wells in the summer. No, sorry. Please feel free to stop if it's not clear. So we see by and large an increase in most of the wells in the township around Gilcrest. But here, for an example, are 3 other wells in the area that show not much trend and are generally deeper down. So again, it's not global. The issue is not everywhere, but in areas where it's high, of course, in the town of Gilcrest, there's been serious impacts. Now here, I've grouped a bunch of them together to show the trends. And in this case, this goes back to January 90 to January 15. And these are all in the township around Gilcrest. And what you can see generally is that there is an upward trend in most of the wells since about 2004, 2005. Again, the straight lines that you see here are joining 2 measurements way apart in some cases, because we resumed measuring a lot of these wells, or other entities did, when the high groundwater issue started becoming more prevalent. But I'm going to take this is a very similar graph. This only goes back to January 1990. This next one takes most of the same wells and goes back. Some of them have much longer period of record. And it's one of those things that, you can show a graph and not get the full, or look at a certain study period and not get the full picture. So again, this one goes back to 1990. And for example, this red well is one I'll point out. You can see this peak. This is 17-1, which is on that map. I go to this one, and here is that same peak in 17-1. And the point being is, look where the water levels in the 40s, and this actually goes back to the 30s for this well, it's just not shown, are actually higher than they are now. So that's not the case with every well, but it's certainly just something to recognize. Okay, any questions about the Gilchrist LaSalle area? So one of the things I wanted to mention, I skipped over earlier with the Gilchrist LaSalle area in particular. We have John Stolp, Director Stolp is chairing this special technical groundwater committee that's a subcommittee of sorts to the South Platte Basin Roundtable. And we've been meeting since the fall 12 or 13 times now, and we have another meeting next week where we're looking at the recommendations from House Bill 1278, the study that Reagan Wascom headed for the Water Institute that came out with quite a few recommendations relating to these issues. We're trying to look at those recommendations and come up with our own prioritization ways to move forward. We've done a couple of things so far. We've come out with a paper on a groundwater monitoring network and how to enhance the existing DWR network, which is very good actually as it is, but we're going to improve it moving forward. And that has ended up as the Representative Sane bill that was passed that I'll talk about briefly in a little later. And the latest thing we're doing, we're trying to get this emergency dewatering going for the town of Gilchrist. We're almost there. So anyway, that's going on right now. We also have that high groundwater analysis that's going to help out both there and in Sterling.
Andy, just a moment. Director George.
Andy, your data is great, and it's a good example of what you can learn with long-term data comparisons. So the comment or the question I'm going to ask you may avoid, because that takes you from data to policy, and probably that's not fair. But if I'm reading this right, what it shows is that the high water levels that are causing concerns today are similar to high water levels in periods of decades. And if that's true, then that makes a harder case for saying that some change within the last few years is causing the problems experienced today. Is that a fair interpretation?
It's certainly one that has been discussed. The point that's brought, though, by some stakeholders is that I've had my house here for 100 years and I finally have a wet basement. I never did before. And so one of my own thoughts was that I think in many of these areas, they were close to a tipping point. And all it took was for a slight change in the water balance, with the curtailment of wells combined with increased recharge, which maybe isn't so slight, and it makes a difference. But that's what we're hoping to get more out of the high groundwater analysis and some of the future modeling as well.
And have you taken these charts and overlain them with a 40 or 50 year chart of wet years, dry years?
We've done something of the sort, yes. And one of the things that, for example, in the Sterling area in particular, and I believe it was 2009, 10, and 11, they had significantly above average rainfall. And of course, I think 2011 was a very wet year basin-wide. The high groundwater analysis scope is limited. We're not going back to 50 years looking at it, but we're trying to at least show it in context of prior to 2002, how it looked.
Thank you.
Director Eklund.
Andy, I think Director George is getting at is it matching up roughly where you have high precipitation and high groundwater, or is there some sort of lag time that is associated with the, water table going up that would make it not so intuitive for somebody to see? You see a wet basement, maybe some period of months after, or maybe even years after the high water event like 2011. And that overlay, have we done that?
Yes, that's being looked at, and that's, of course, the complication with the groundwater return flow lagging, because precip, of course, can have an immediate effect, which will be small from a certain storm, although you can actually see a response in our data loggers to a big storm, but we're talking, inches maybe, and probably not even that. But of course, even the precipitation recharge is lagged from up gradient, but of course diversion canal leakage, irrigation, deep percolation from irrigation, all those things are coming in both in the area and up gradient and coming down. And unfortunately, in the case of the town of Gilcrest, when you look at the bedrock topography and such, a couple of the upper ditches, the Evans number 2 area, are really close to a bedrock coming to the surface. And so they are perched on that, but they're losing water from that. And of course, they're also irrigating. That's going down in the alluvium, and it's a fairly steep bedrock surface at first, and then it flattens out at Gilcrest. And so it's deep there, but it's also kind of like a bowl. And there's not really any good natural drainage out of the Gilcrest area. And that's actually one of the problems with some of this area too, that I'll talk about in a moment.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, moving on to the Sterling area. Mara couldn't have done a better job of situating this board meeting because we're right in the middle of it here. Country Club Hills neighborhood is, make sure I got my directions right, is just to the south of us, right here. And oh, am I looking the wrong way?
The other side.
Okay. I know it's south though, so whichever way. When I came in the building, it was that way. And then the other neighborhood that's been affected, Pawnee Ridge, is to the north. And we're right in between the two right here. So if you look at that Sterling map that I handed out, it's up here, but that's why I wanted to hand it out to you so you could at least see that. In this case, Division of Water Resources installed 20 monitoring wells in the two neighborhoods altogether, and there were existing wells, so they've been monitoring all of those. And they did some work also to look at the groundwater. This next map that I'm showing just shows the general water table gradient. And this is the flow is coming from the west, northwest. The river's over here, and the flow is generally coming this way. And as you can see, these are irrigation ditches in the light blue. There are, of course, several irrigation ditches. These neighborhoods were built in old agricultural areas for the most part. And so they're going right through the neighborhoods in some cases now. But of course, they predate the neighborhoods by quite a long time.
Director Wattenberg.
Director Wattenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Andy, are those ditches lined or are they just earthen ditches?
No, they are not lined. And there's also quite a few recharge ponds, as you'll see on the map. And in fact, for the country clubs area, one of the ponds is actually recharging augmentation water for wells that are within the subdivision. There's of course irrigated land up gradient to the west, to the left. So I'll move on and show some hydrographs for wells in this area. Country Club Hills first. Now, these wells were all installed as part of the pilot project. So the record in this case only goes back. This is May 2012, and then to February 2015. And unfortunately, it's too bad we don't have the data right here because I mentioned those were higher precip years before. And my understanding is that some of these areas experienced their highest groundwater actually in 2011, which was the culmination of that shorter wet period. But still, you can see, there's definitely some high peaks. This well is CCN, Country Clubs North 2S, and the S actually stands for shallow. And that one's right in the middle of the Country Clubs neighborhood. You can see CCN2 and CCN2S, they're nested piezometers. The S is a shallower one. And one thing that the Division of Water Resources hydrogeological staff found is that in drilling the wells to put these in, is that there's clay layers and perched water tables in some of these areas. And we actually see at that CCN2, there's a shallow water level and a deeper water level, and the shallow water level is higher. And so it complicates things again that we actually have this perched water table aquifer. But in that case, you can see this particular well came within about 3 feet in May 2014. So again, we're seeing the peaks occur generally in the summer in response to irrigation and to the ditches running. Trying to remember if there was something else I wanted to show on that one. I'll move on to the Pawnee Ridge. Again, this is the neighborhood to the north on the other side of Pioneer Park. The Pawnee Ridge neighborhood's a different, what's curious is that these two neighborhoods are different situations. The Country Club Hills, as you would, has hills. And where we're seeing, and so the people on the hills aren't having a problem. There's a couple of houses though in lower lying land that are having a problem. In the Pawnee Ridge, it's a more plainer neighborhood, with a gradient from the west downward to the east. And there, what we think from looking at the drilling records is that there's kind of a pinching again of the bedrock maybe coming up a little bit and just unfortunately forcing the groundwater shallower. Because if you go to wells to the west, and I'll show a couple of hydrographs here, the groundwater is quite deep, just going a couple of miles to the west of here. And one thing to mention, we're talking about the drainage ditches being built in the early 1900s. I should go back real quick and show this. This line right here, the real straight line is the Pioneer Drain. And it was dug in the early 1900s to drain those agricultural lands. And the neighborhoods here, here's the Country Club Hills neighborhood, are just up draining this drainage ditch. We've done a tour of that, and it's quite deep, and it's still getting groundwater in it and running pretty good after a short distance. So again, you see a slight upward trend maybe in these Pawnee Ridge wells, but it's hard to tell on this short a time period, again, from 2012 to 2015. One of the homeowners in this area, there's a street in particular at the northwest corner of the subdivision that has been affected the most. And one homeowner took it on his own to get a dewatering well going, and it had a very good effect in the short term. Their problem is now the way they were getting rid of the water was objected to by a neighboring farmer. They were putting it into a drainage, and it was on his land and he didn't want that. So now one of the things we're doing in our technical committee is looking at a way to help him get the water away from that. But he doesn't need to run that 24/7. He's only need to run that briefly, is my understanding. Here's a couple other wells. These are at the south edge of Pawnee Ridge, and here you can see 5 to 10 feet deep, and they have a very cyclical pattern with respect to the irrigation season. But they're not, there doesn't seem to be any increase, and they're not wouldn't appear to be causing any problems. DWR put in some newer wells, the SGW wells, just more recently. These started in 2013. And they put these up closer to the North Sterling Canal up in the northwest part of this figure that I handed out to see. And again, you can see the groundwater levels here from 10 to 25 feet deep, and there's not really any trend you can see yet in those. There's quite a few existing wells in the area that have longer measurement times. I'll just go briefly through those. And the main point to show is that they're not, in most of these other wells that have longer records, you don't see a long-term trend. So this is actually that dewatering well that the neighbor in Pawnee Ridge, Mr. St. John, put in. And again, he said his worst problems were in 2011. So now this dewatering well is showing it to be 7 or 8 feet below ground surface. This is the Lebsock well, which you can see on the map is a mile west of the Pawnee Ridge neighborhood up in the north central part of that figure. And the groundwater there is 30 to 35 feet down, and it's just a little bit of the ways west. So you can see unfortunately, it may be a factor of the bedrock rise. Coincidentally, we put an SPDSS well this DSS 10 Sterling well, which is also located in that similar area. It's just southwest of the Pawnee Ridge neighborhood. In the depth of water, and we have a data logger in there, so it has a very continuous record, except for a place where the data logger went out of commission. But there it's 25, 30 feet down, and in fact seems to show a trending decrease in that same area. The O'Connell well is shown on the figure. It's actually just north of us of the country club right here, and you can see it's 20, 25 feet down. Another well this well is to the southeast of Country Club Hills, and no noticeable trend. Maybe a little bit up, but it's hard to tell. Another well, Fritzler well that goes back to 2006. Again, no noticeable trend, 10 to 15 feet down below ground surface. And this well is to the south of Country Club Hills, and again, 15 to 20 feet down below ground surface since 2006. And this one I put in because it's a longer period of record. It goes back to 1962. Although the gap in the middle, there were only a couple of data points, but generally it seems to show about the same water table now as it did 50 years ago.
Andy, where is that last well?
That's the CSU 53 well, which is
I
going
see.
much closer to the river. So it's quite
Thank
a
you.
ways.
Okay.
And the point being just to show the regional picture. So unfortunately, those neighborhoods seem to be getting the worst of the situation. It's certainly not a widespread. Although we did have some reports of houses in the central part of Sterling that had some water in their basements back in that period. They didn't come up in the like Reagan Wascom study, or they don't seem to have a chronic problem.
Thank you.
Any questions about the pilot projects, where we're going with that?
Andy, it's nice to get some data and look at maps now and see where these areas are and understand kind of the topography and.
What I wanted to move on to next was the legislation that was passed this year. There were 3 bills relating to South Platte groundwater that were passed. I highlighted these in the memo. There was the House Bill 1013, Quorum, Sonnenberg, and Hodge. This one took the recommendation number 1 from Reagan and Wascom's 1278 study and said, which included 2 things: get 2 pilot projects going, and this is different some from the pilot projects we're doing, but get 2 pilot projects going that look at alternative ways of managing the high groundwater and lowering the high groundwater. And also to have a DWR review new recharge structures, ponds that go in to see if they might be having effects on the groundwater. We're directed to establish criteria and guidelines and work with DWR to do these pilot projects over the next 4 years. One in Gilcrest, LaSalle area, and one in the Sterling area. So that's one of the bills. The next bill, 1166, is Representative Sain's bill for a monitoring network. Now, what this basically took off from it was a recommendation in Reagan Wascom study again, in 1278 study, but our technical groundwater committee, that was the first thing we looked at, and we came up with a white paper that we passed on to the roundtable that they endorsed for moving forward with the DWR network, which already had 100+ wells in it, spatially distributed throughout the area, but then to enhance it and improve it where possible. And Representative Sain put that into the bill form, basically. And so we're moving forward on that. DWR got a little extra funding, I think, to help with a half FTE because they're already spread thin on the folks going out in the field to do these measurements and to download the equipment. Now, House Bill 1178 from Representative Sain establishes a grant program that we administer, and it supplied funding for the next 2 years, $165,000 for the upcoming fiscal year, and then $290,000 for the following fiscal year. We developed criterion guidelines. Excuse me? We developed criteria and guidelines for this one as well, working with DWR and working with the South Platte Roundtable and the technical committee. And again, the purpose in this case is just to lower the water table for emergency purposes. Whereas the Representative Quorum, Senator Sonnenberg bill, Bill 1013, is looking at 4 years, more of a longer term. What are alternative ways of lowering the groundwater table? So what we're thinking around, here's where there's no decision item on this, but if you have any, we'll maybe look for some guidance. What we're thinking now, the town of Gilcrest, we're working with them right now to try and get some dewatering going. We've provided some short-term funding to them. So has DOLA, to get a well going, and more wells as soon as we can figure out. The problem is there's not an easy way to get rid of the water we've pumped, because there is no natural drainage going around from town. The one drainage ditch in the area, we've run into problems because it dumps into the Union Ditch, and the Union Ditch doesn't really want to be involved. And it's so there's all complications everywhere we look. Still, though, we're looking for solutions to this. So because they're getting another grant from DOLA for over $1 million to fix their wastewater treatment plant, because of the high groundwater is a big issue. And we don't want that to go for naught, for them to sink this money into the wastewater treatment plant and then just have problems occur in the next couple of years. So we have some short-term funding in place there, but we certainly anticipate the town of Gilcrest coming in for an application for a grant as soon as they can after July 1st. But we have to develop criteria and guidelines. And so what we're thinking now is that we would bring those guidelines before you in July, get those approved, and then move forward to where we can accept grants, bring grants before you, applications the following board meeting. That does delay things by a few months, but we don't see an easy way to accelerate that. I think we'll certainly be working in the short term, especially with the town of Gilcrest. One thing to note is that Representative Sain included language in the bill that anyone down to private individuals could apply for grants. However, they need to provide real-time monitoring and data collection while they're doing this dewatering as well.
Thank you. Director Stolp.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to add to information I may have neglected to say yesterday is that, Andy's a member of the technical team. We have Joe Frank in the room that's a member of the technical team. I think when we were out here, Ken Fritzler helped guide us around the Sterling area. Looking around, Dave Nettles in the back is a division engineer and has been quite helpful on helping guide us through some of the administration issues. And so we've had a great team working on this. And Andy, certainly, he and Kevin Ryan from the Division of Water Resources represents the state engineer. And the state's been well represented. We have people from Northern and Central, as well as the lower, which Joe represents. And then a couple private sector engineers. And so these people have been serving gratis or pro bono, whatever you want to call it. But I'm proud of the way they work together. And we start out with 2 hour and a half meetings that have stretched into 3, and we meet about every 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. And so they've really dedicated a lot of time to this effort, and the state has really helped provide, even though it through some other agencies, some of the maps and things like that, but it's been real helpful. And James Eklund and the other financing part of the Water Conservation Board have been able to come up with some immediate resources, kind of robbing from Peter to pay Paul, I think sometimes, but to make sure this keeps moving ahead. And so there are a lot of people that deserve a lot of credit on the success of this project.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Director Eklund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Andy, for the report. We're very active in the basin on this particular issue, and I think you summed it up very well, as Dr. Stolp did yesterday. I think one of the things that we're kind of coming to terms with here in the Gilcrest and LaSalle areas, especially Gilcrest, is that it's in this paleo channel. So it's going to be difficult for us to, fix this in perpetuity. And so we've got to be thinking more about systemic solutions as opposed to Band-Aids, because the Band-Aids are going to fall off every year and we're going to have to put a new one on. So I think the data is the emphasis right now. We've got to know how the system operates and what we can do to influence it. I don't know if the technical team has, it sounds like you guys have toured fairly extensively these areas. We also have contracted with Brown and Caldwell to do some work on the data. And I've received, and I know you have as well, inquiry as to whether or not the contractor has been out and about in the basin to take tours and go physically visit the sites. If you feel like it'd be something you could expand on or address, I was wondering about your opinion of that. Is that how we want to be spending, how we want our contractors to be spending their time, or do we want them to be doing the data analysis? I'm trying not to ask a loaded question, but.
No, and it's fine too, because Ralph Topper from Division Water Resources, I think we were all adamant that we get them out there in the field. We'd already done that.
Okay.
So Brown Caldwell, along with GWR Steph and myself, I didn't make the Sterling tour, but they did a full day looking at the Sterling area and a full day in the Gilchrist LaSalle area. Touring around, and Ralph, as part of these pilot projects, has been going out there, monthly practically, to see these sites, so he knows them better than most. And he's discovered quite a few things, where new groundwater coming out, daylighting. And so I can speak from experience, they're very thorough tours.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that those entities were aware of that.
Well, I think we'll try and be very clear of what's happened to date, because I wasn't really even that familiar with what they'd done. So we'll get back to the legislative representatives that are interested in that and make sure we tell the accurate story.
Thank you, Director Eklund, and I want to offer my thanks too for your work and for the technical committee's work. And Joe Frank, I know you've put a lot of time personally into this, managing the Lower South Platte District, and Kenny also, Kenny Fritzler. There aren't any easy answers, but we might find some temporary solutions in times of high water, but I think you're right, Andy. I think some of them are going to be long-term issues that we struggle with.
And in response to yours and Director Eklund's comments, right now the things we are looking at are really Band-Aids. However, we are also discussing kind of midterm solutions and long-term solutions, because we realize the pumping one irrigation well on the side of Gilchrist isn't going to solve the problem, and we have to be pumped nonstop. And so we're looking at other ways to deal with this.
Thank you very much. Directors have no other questions, and you have nothing else. Andy, we'll move on.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you again. Ted, I think we are moving to item 25, and you're up.
Yes, Ted Kowalski, CWCB staff, for the record. It's not lost on me that I'm the last thing standing between you and your long drives home. So I'll try to be as quick as I can be. Take you from the land of flooded basements and high groundwater and raging rivers over to the Colorado River, where we're in the midst of a 15-year drought, the longest 15-year or driest 15 years that we've seen in the historical history since the early part of this last century. But also, too, if you look at tree rings, it's the driest 15-year period in thousands of years when you look at the tree ring data. To that end, the state of Colorado has been working with the other basin states and our federal partners, the Bureau of Reclamation and others, to explore drought contingency planning. And we've spoken to you a number of times about the activities we're doing and exploring in the context of drought contingency planning. and last December, the Upper Colorado River Commission passed a resolution sort of advocating for sort of a three-pronged approach for the upper basin associated with drought contingency planning, trying to protect critical levels at Lake Powell, which you all know. The level at which we drop below minimum hydropower at Lake Powell has implications for funding of our recovery programs, for the Upper Colorado River Recovery Program, the San Juan River Recovery Program, and those programs provide ESA compliance for hundreds of water diversions and water projects over on the West Slope. In addition, if we were to drop below minimum power, that would affect the funding for the Salinity Control Forum, which is an important program for the state of Colorado. And also for, it would affect power rates, which Glen Canyon Dam and the CRISP facilities provide hydropower, low cost, green energy power for hundreds of power providers within Colorado and within the upper basin. So it's a critical for a whole host of reasons, not to even mention helping assure, and it serves as a very good surrogate for making sure we meet our compact obligations. So we've been working on a drought contingency plan. We have a three-pronged approach. Cloud seeding is one aspect of that. We've spoken to this board that a second aspect is extended operations, which is really using the three upper CRISP facilities, Flaming Gorge, Aspinall Unit, and Navajo Reservoir. If there is storage upstream in those reservoirs that could help prop up the level of Powell, we're trying to work through how we would release that water from those upstream reservoirs to protect critical levels of Powell, and also too, how we would recover that storage in subsequent years. We don't want to just send it down to Lake Powell to have it continue down to the lower basin by operation of the 07 guidelines. We want to make sure that if it would be a temporary protection of the critical levels of Powell, and then we could recover that appropriately upstream. And the third aspect is demand management, and that's a little bit more complicated in the upper basin and in Colorado specifically. We are actively engaged in the Water Bank Working Group, and you guys are well aware of the work that's been going on with our partners from the River District and Southwestern District, Front Range Water Council, and the Nature Conservancy, where we are funding research looking at the effects of deficit irrigation or temporary fallowing on production and also on water, and how those two relate. And we have some long-term studies that you funded through the ATM, or Alternative to Transfers Mechanisms grant process. The other aspect is something that is squarely before you, which last July, Denver Water, the Southern Nevada Water Authority, the Central Arizona Project, which provides water supply to Phoenix, and the Metropolitan Water District of California, which provides water to Los Angeles and San Diego, among other communities, funded, along with the Bureau of Reclamation, $11 million for a pilot program to explore system conservation projects. And these projects would be projects that would temporarily reduce, it's a 2-year pilot program, they would temporarily reduce consumptive use and be paid for it. And it can be municipal, it could be agriculture, it could be industrial. All types of uses could occur, and at least $2.75 million of that funding has to be spent in the upper basin over the 2-year process. The Upper Colorado River Commission most recently, within the last week, signed an agreement to help facilitate the implementation of this pilot program with the funding partners. And we're actively seeking proposals for the system conservation program. And we have an RFP up on our website, and we've shared it with water providers and interested stakeholders and interested water users on the West Slope within Colorado. And similarly, our upper division states of Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico are also sharing that out among their water users. And we have 2 different deadlines. We have a June 17th deadline for pre-proposals for this first round, maybe for some late deficit irrigation or some projects that are not sensitive to the irrigation season, so perhaps some municipal conservation projects. And then we have another deadline of November 1st that we'll be looking at. And you have attached to the memo the RFP that's also available by link on our website. You have the agreement that I referenced in that was among the funders. And we also can get you the agreement that we've recently signed between the UCRC and the funders if you care to see that agreement, as well as a draft application for folks to fill out if they're interested in applying for the RFP. So that's a little bit of background just on the drought contingency planning that's going on, and specifically the system conservation agreement. In Colorado specifically, we have a statute that provides if you are participating in a state-recognized conservation program, and you do not use your water because you're participating in that program, that does not count against you in terms of abandonment. Similarly, in certain divisions, a statute that was passed a couple of years ago, there's a provision that talks about historical consumptive use for a water right in divisions 4, 5, and 6. A water judge shall not consider any decrease resulting from, and then there's a number of activities that are listed, including the non-use or decrease in use of water from a water right by its owner for a maximum of 5 years in any consecutive 10-year period as a result of participating in a state-recognized water conservation program. So what a CWCB approval would do is allow water users within at least Division 4, 5, and 6 and change cases to participate in this program and say, well, at least this 0 year will not count against me if I were to change that case, or it would not count against me in any of the Colorado River Basin divisions in terms of an abandonment. And so we're coming to you asking for your approval of this program as a state-approved water conservation program. It's the first time that I'm aware of that the statute has been used or implemented, at least at the state level. Nevertheless, I think it's important and I think it's appropriate in this instance where we're talking about a 2-year pilot that has a whole host of conditions and terms that are attached to it. So you have the staff recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Michelle Garrison of the CWCB staff is also working with me on this, as is Shanti Rosette from the Attorney General's office. And they're both here if there's any really difficult questions. So thank you.
Director George, do you have
I think your logic is unassailable. It makes very good sense. I think we ought to be doing it. I would move staff recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's moved by Director George and seconded by Director McLeod. Are there any other comments? Thank you, Ted, for bringing this forward. With that, we'll vote on the motion before us to approve the staff recommendations for item 25. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that motion is passed. And I believe that concludes our agenda. Director Eklund, do you have any parting shots?
Parting shots. Very briefly, sitting patiently through 2 days of meetings, Emily LaDolce, can you come up here?
Yes, Emily, please join us.
Most of you have met her over the course of the proceedings here, but she's brand new to the CWCB. She's working with Andy and Ted on all sorts of data things that are way over my, we're really excited to have her. Her background's from AMEC, where she spent a good chunk of her career, and she's from CU. So we've got somebody who knows Colorado and knows water, and we're really excited to have her on the team. So welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for being here and being patient with all of us, and enjoy having you on board here. Thank you. All right. If that's it, I want to thank you all too for your patience and your diligence in prevailing and getting through our agendas here. So, Mara, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah.
Yes. With that, I'll ask Director.
I would make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Seconded by Director Gallagher and Wattenberg. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That motion passes, and